All right, so here's landing gear parts. So the main parts I'm putting on some 1/32 balsa. I am going to build this differently than what it calls for. It really just calls for those on cardboard and you stick them in the wing. But I'm going to put wire in there because I'm a little nervous. These are the strut coverings, and that's the main axle covering. And notice they don't have little tabs on them, and that's because I'm doing something a little different here. Then there's the parts that I'm going to go over the edge, which I guess would cover up the bungees that would give you your axle a little bit of a little bounce in its bungee. Now that's is typical of what these have, and you can see what I'm doing. I left this last one to cut this out at the end. These are the pieces that go around the strut legs. So I cut them carefully, but this one, notice I'm cutting off that tab. I'm leaving the tab there. And that's because my wheels or landing gear, I think, is a little bit thicker. And because I'm going to put a piece of wire on them. And so they're not going to be able to wrap around anyway. What I'm going to do is paste these around, fold them over, paste them and glue them down, and then just paint the edges with some correctly made paint. So it's not a big deal. So there are those pieces. The first thing I do is I take my brass wire and I get the angles and I bend them. So I mark off about where it's supposed to bend the first time, and I've made a little longer than it needs to be on purpose because that'll fit into the holes in the bottom of the wing. And I just bend this a little bit, and it's a lot of just trial and error. If you're really good at this, you can judge it really quickly. In my case, I have to do it several times. Um, and in this case, I look and I figure, okay, I need just a little bit more to bend up. So I put my little guys right there, bend up a little more. And you just keep doing this until you get the angle right. Like in that case, the angle's way off. So you have to bend it so that it's about better than it was. And once you get it, mark it off long again, cut off the end. I'm doing this because I know one fellow who built this model. He actually made the wires for the wheels um, contiguous. Anyway, they were along the parts that hold up the nacelles, and I thought that was a difficult thing to do, so I didn't do that. But then I was worried it wasn't going to hold up the airplane. So I poke little holes where the axle is going to go, and then you just very carefully cut these out. What's nice about the being on balsa is that even though the balsa is cross-grained in a part like right there, that's like the worst way you could do it is have cross-grain on that thin piece. But the paper helps hold everything together and makes it so that it actually, you're gonna be able to get it apart. So there's that piece, and now I'm going to carefully take my wire and kind of smash it into one side. Um, and I tried to make it so that I put them into the side that was just the wood on there, because that way that'll be on the inside of the wheel of the landing gear, and it won't be as visible. Turns out it doesn't make any difference. So you can put it on either side. That brass is so skinny that it isn't a problem. It doesn't look bad. I'll put it that way when they're done. So I put my super glue around where that wire is going to go. And you wouldn't have to use brass, by the way, but so far these seem like they're going to work just fine. You could use other wire, or maybe it would work with just cardboard and the paper. I just have a feeling it wouldn't, at least in my model, because my model is probably a little heavier than it was designed to be. So I just have visions of the landing gear collapsing. So that's why I'm putting these little wires in. Plus, I find having a little wire nubbin on the ends, it's an easy, great way to attach struts and things. And it makes a real positive place to glue rather than just kind of butt joining it or putting it kind of adding the piece of paper where it's supposed to go. So now I use my white glue and I'm starting to put on these two bungee areas. These I would assume in real life would have been, rounded. So if you really want to do this right, you probably should make these, give them some shape, gives them three-dimensional shape. But I'm just putting them on like this because you're not going to see them that much anyway. You can see the white part there is going to be this is the inside of the landing gear, since there's two sides. This is the inside because that's where the little axle cover is going to go. So do the very same thing. Put the little bungee cover area on the other side. And you just got to make sure when you build these, you make, one right and one left. You make sure that the part that has the axle covering is on the inside of each landing gear. Because knowing me, I do not do well with three-dimensional space and thinking through these things. So now I start to put on where these little legs are going to go, leg coverings. And what I do is, in this case, I give them a pre-bend because I got to go over this wire and the wood. And what I did here is took a pair of these tweezers and I kind of have them open just a little bit, about the width of the 1/32 sheet. And that way I've got a bend that kind of goes over and gives me a little better chance to have a flat attachment point on the sides. Rather than just cutting, rather than just bending it straight down the middle, because this isn't. It has to go over sort of a square end. And again, reiterate, this is all stuff that is not the way the kit's supposed to be made. This is all me doing this for strength purposes. So I put little glue at first, just on the top edge, and then I put my little piece of paper down there. The pointy arrow part goes at the base, and just line it up right in the center of the strut. And then the little bow tie area up there, those little V cutout, that goes at the top, because when that rolls over, you'll have a nice straight portion that goes into the wing. So I let that dry first before I try to fold it over, because if I try to fold it over now, it will move all over the place and be horrible. This is the part that goes over the front landing gear. Same thing. I make my little embossing so that it's actually a little bit wider. It's not just a single line. And then I do the same thing. Glue it, in this case, on the front of the front of the landing gear, of the leading edge landing gear. And this time, the little part that has the cutout, the round cutout, goes over right down to the base. You can see it's right over the bungee cover area. And then the little V is up top again, and just make sure it's centered, and let that puppy dry. While it's drying, you can do something else. And I'm going to fold those over and pinch them together to give me some sides once it's dry. But let it dry for a little bit so you're not going to struggle. While that's happening, I emboss the tab on the inside for the axle cover with a couple of passes of the back of the X-Acto blade. And then fold this over. And this is very simple, but I show you how to do it anyway because I should. And then once that's done, take my suitable round object and start to roll the paper to convince it to go in the direction I want it to go. And works fine. Doesn't have to be absolutely folded together at this point. I just want it so that it will come together easily, which it does, and it's not crinkling on the leading edge. You want it to be kind of nice and straight. So that's going to work. Because these models, like on my wings, leading edges of my wings, on the Vimy, if you look closely, there's little crinkles in places, so they're not as nice as they should be. They should be, you shouldn't have any crinkles. It should be, bam, nice and smooth. Either by putting, tissue in there or another piece of wood, something, but mine aren't that beautiful, but we won't tell anybody. Roll this over, make sure that it lines up, it comes in contact. Get the glue started. This stuff, again, it's tacky quickly, which is great for our purposes. And you can squeeze it tight because, remember, you're gluing it to the outside of that fold. That piece still folds just fine, so you could still spread this out as much as you want, and it would still look good. It's not that you're going to glue the trailing edges together and they're going to look all crimped. As it turns out, looking at the profile of the landing gear, it has to be a little bit squished anyway. It has to be a very thin airfoil. So I took my ruler and pushed down very gently on the apex of the airfoil, essentially, kind of crush it down a bit. And now I locate where my axle is going to go. So I line it up, and I take a pencil, and I just make a little mark so that I know where the axle actually gets added on either side, just because that'll be a good place to. So I'm just making a little mark on the little axle cover, so I can see where it's supposed to go. Do the same thing for the other side. That way you're ensuring that you got a level, straight axle, and it's going to fit nice. There's my axle. This is out of just regular piano wire. Those black lines are kind of where the struts are going to go. And that helps me centralize this thing. Stick it in here, and then when I squeeze down the middle with some glue, it's going to end up looking like that. So that's good. That's easy. So all I did with this was put a little blob of glue on either end and let it kind of drip down into the center. I took a little piece of unused wire and sort of coaxed it down so that it would drip down a little bit more down into the center there. This doesn't have to be, put together like Fort Knox. It just has to hold the axle, the piece of paper on the axle. It's not structural by any means. The glue, when you glue the axle into the landing gear struts, that's the important joint. But this helps you a little bit, just get some of the glue down in there so they have a more surface for the little axle to glue onto. And then you pop your axle in and line it up on the lines that you made. And you just slide it in, you make sure it's lined up, and it also has the area where the struts are going to connect to on either side, so it's even. And then you just kind of squeeze down a little bit, and your glue will dry, and you'll have a little cover on your axle, and it will look just fine. It's three-dimensional enough, and again, any white there we're going to probably touch up with our paint, because we're going to, again, paint the edges of the struts anyway. So there's the axle and the axle cover ready to go. By this time, this little guy is probably dry. So all I got to do is push these over. And you got to be careful. Even though I got wire on these to buttress them, which really helps a lot, you do have to sort of be careful because you don't want to crunch anything. Like I said, I was surprised in this kit that there was no extensive use of wire on these, but there isn't. So anyway, I put some glue on either tab. And remember, there was supposed to be an extra tab on these, but I can't get these all the way around the structure I have. They're never going to fit. So I just do this. And I do have an opening, but again, with paint, that's going to be just fine. At this point, I basically close these as best I can, switch out some of the glue, make sure they're kind of straight. So the leading edges will be nice, and the sides will be pretty good. All I have to do is go around and do the back edge and then the teardrop edge around the bungee cover. Do the same thing for this one. Make sure that it folds together a little bit, having added the glue, and then you just squeeze it shut. I'm just trying to make sure it's going to look pretty good. If you squeeze out any glue, like you see my thumbs are full of glue right now. If there's lots of glue that comes out, you can actually let it dry and sort of scrape it off the model. It'll be fine. If you spray your model parts with like clear varnish before you put them together, that also helps it so the glue will not stick on the colored pieces. That's actually a really good idea. I didn't do that with this model. Probably should, but I didn't do it. Now I'm just making sure it's squeezed as close as I can to being closed, which again is just shy of being closed, but that's okay. And then we'll start to work on trying to actually put it on the wing, on the lower wing, which actually is a pretty simple task. My holes for the axle go all the way through, and they line up nice. I had one issue in that one of the holes actually broke through, so I think this one is probably okay. You can see I'm kind of making sure that it's going to go into the right hole and everything is even, which it is. The other side, when I did that, I kind of broke the hole, so it made it a little more difficult to put together than it needs to be. So the other side went much better. Again, that's the rule of making movies. The side you don't film goes together really easily. But anyway, that's how it goes together. I did the other one off camera, and we're starting to then figure these out. I made sure I drilled out these holes at the approximate angle where they're supposed to be on the underside. And then I add a little glue onto my brass, and I've test fit these a couple of times so they're going to fit, and they fit right in those holes, and you just put them in, and they're beautiful. And again, usually on the other side, I already had this piece on, but because I broke through, and that again would make it much easier, but because it broke through, I had to do them separately, which is not the end of the world. Put this in again to the holes. They fit nicely, And there's enough time that you can play around and get the angles right. So now I'm just kind of sighting down, making sure it's pretty close to where it's supposed to be. And here I put the axle up into that little hole. So I pushed it up like that into that slot, and then I'm adding glue. And I'm making sure that the angle is correct. I'm making sure that the landing gear from the front looks good. Now I'm making sure that the axle cover is gluing to the inside of the landing gear. And you're just checking things to make sure things are straight and true. You don't want your axle way off. If it's off a little bit, it doesn't matter, because you're not going to hold the airplane like this and display it and look at it. And when you put the wheels on, you can, help get rid of some problems. Give a little touch of zip kicker to make sure things are dry and strong. And I do the same thing with each of the little legs to the connections in the wing, just to make sure. I don't know if it's necessary, because the stuff will dry, but this way it feels like you locked it in place. And, there it is. So it's starting to look good. And I'm very pleased, because this is the first time I set it on its own two little feet. And lo and behold, it sits nice, it sits straight. It's so nice to get it off the ground, because now I won't break the lower aileron cables. I got those lower ailerons. Oh, look, it fires right up. The lower aileron control horns, I'm breaking them constantly. Now I can't break them because they're elevated off the ground. So now what I'll do is rig those, and then, I'll probably build wheels first, just sandwiching balsa and make the wheels. And then I'm just showing you here to remind you, I'm just going to paint these edges with appropriate green and brown mix, and it will turn out just fine. So I'm very pleased that she's off the ground. Cool stuff. Oh, if I don't talk to you all, have a very happy 2024. Happy New Year.